line with a sermon about the deep divisions in our culture and it was asking us to look beyond the politics to see people. But there's a lot of imagery, there's a lot of things in that video that I think in the light of what's happened this week, it might be offensive to probably both sides of the aisle. So I'll post that on Facebook, and I'll be far away, and you can't crucify me when you watch it. We're in let me throw this out. When I was growing up, I used to make fun of my dad when he would help me put things together, and we'd get out the instructions, and he'd have to take his glasses off to read. And I would always make fun of him. It's like, why do you have glasses if you can't read with them? And then one day you wake up, and you have his receding hairline, and now you have his eyesight. I wonder what else is coming. When I was in high school, and where I went to school, it was called County Line. The elementary school was in one county, and the high school was in another county, right there on the line. And the high school was literally 7th through 12th grade. You imagine how that worked out. How many times as a little 7th grader you got stuffed in a trash can, thrown in a locker. And then the absolute worst was PE, physical education, where they lumped you all together, 7th through 12th graders. And our coach, his favorite game, and I hate this game to this day, was dodgeball. He loved that game. Always tell us, you got to be smarter than the ball. Well, when you're a 7th grader playing dodgeball against senior high kids, it's not that much fun. They can hurl that ball pretty hard and slam you against the wall. Coach was sadistic, but that was in the 80s. I guess that's how we rolled. But my saving grace was this 12th grade girl, kind of the homecoming queen. I was getting hammered pretty hard one day by some guys, and she took the ball and walked up to one of them and slammed it right in his face and said, "You bother that kid again, you're going to regret it." You know, it's amazing. Women really do have a lot of power. And all those men, all those boys in that PE class, I think they secretly said, "Yes, ma'am." And they did whatever she said. We had a bully growing up. He always made us play football together. And he was much bigger than we were. County Line did not have a football team. He went to the other school. So he was a lot bigger than we were, a couple of grades older. But he would always gather us up when we were 80-pound weaklings. I mean, it was horrible. And we had to play football against him for his practice. And we would come home bruised and beaten because he just loved tackling us and slamming us in the ground. And I remember one day, we were at the church yard playing, and we were all, yet again, battered and bruised, and he was laughing. And I walk around the church, and there's my older brother. Now, growing up, older brothers can be quite difficult, but every now and then they serve their purpose. Now, he played on the senior high team, and he was a star and starter. And he said, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "We're playing football." He goes, "Oh, can I play for you guys?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So us 80-pound weaklings for the next 30 minutes kind of sat on the sidelines as we watched my older brother plow into that schoolyard bully over and over and over again until he finally cried uncle and went home to mommy crying. Bullies. That's what we're talking about today. I've discovered in life that, that kid was a bully, but his mom was also a bully. She was our church bully, and she bullied everybody in that congregation. Just awful, awful woman. And I've learned no matter where you go in life, you're always going to find one. In any organization and any group of people, there's going to be one bully that's going to just beat up on everybody. Might not be physically, it might be verbally, but they're always there. Now, I say that because Christianity in America is really approaching a crisis point. I don't know how many of you keep track of the different studies and polling But as a pastor, I worry about that stuff because who's going to be in the pews next Sunday? I worry about that. I go home and I cry about that. Might have a few drinks over that. But we have said over and over, and it's getting worse and worse, people are leaving the church in droves. And as you drill down into this, and as you interview these people who are leaving, I think they call them the nuns and the duns. They're just done with church. Or they never believed in church anyway. And they're walking out. The nuns and duns are now bigger than any denomination in America. Now that should be shocking to us Christians who believe we live in a Christian nation. We live in a Christian nation where most people don't go to church. And then now, 2 weeks ago, there came out with another study. Not only has church attendance dropped below 50%, but a belief in God has dropped below 50%. At least the Christian God. People are so fed up. They've not only walked out of the pews, they've just walked out of faith entirely. Now, yeah, we can blame it on, hey, if we only had prayer in school, everything would be fine. Or if we just led more moral lives, everything would be fine. Or, whatever the excuse is we come up with about, we look back at the glory days of our nation thinking if we had just go back to that point, everything would be great again. But if you start asking these people, and I started asking during my military days because here I was as a chaplain, much older than these 18-year-old kids, and I would ask them, hey, how come you don't go to chapel service? Do you go to church at home? One kid was he was a self-professed Norse pagan, Wiccan. It's like, what is that? He goes, well, basically it's just something I put down because I just don't like Christianity. And I start talking to these people, and we talk a lot about Jesus Christ, and it always amazed me. They love Jesus. They love to talk about that Bible, what Jesus said and did. They're all for that. But they cannot stand the church. And you start asking, and there's some pretty good reasons why. They talk about bigotry and prejudice. They talk about growing up and being told, no, you can't bring your black friend to church. They talk about growing up being told, oh, your friend who is gay is not welcome here. They grow up seeing people judged and excluded and condemned, and they say, I just don't want to be a part of a group like that. You guys are just angry and you're hateful. If that's God, I don't want to go to heaven with you all. And that really cut me to the core when that's what they said. Given a choice between heaven and hell, if it was heaven and eternity spent with a bunch of hateful, judgmental people, they said, I'd rather take my chances in hell. That's heartbreaking. Marketing agents would say we have a branding problem. We have become the schoolyard bullies. Google any just random preacher and listen to what they preach. You want to know where the hate and anger that's coming from in this country is coming from? It's coming out of the pulpits. It's coming out of churches. The Westboro Baptist Church, you remember those yahoos? They're now mainstream. And that was part of the video. They showed clips of the Westboro Baptist Church, and that made me uncomfortable too. But they're no longer some fringe, kooky element. They're now mainstream Christians. As the Christian church more and more wants to try to purify itself and become Puritan and exclude people by telling others you're not welcome here because you're not like us. And as we do that more and more people just head for the exits. Because let's be honest, in our theologies, in our political opinions, we are the bullies. Part of this sermon is, and part of that video that I wanted to get across was, if the Christian church doesn't start getting past its dogma and doctrines, its theologies, its ideologies, its political statements, if it doesn't move past that and start noticing the people that they're hurting, there's not going to be a church left in a generation. Why would a young person want to be a part of a church when we care more about politics and theologies than we do about individual people? I mentioned this last week or a couple weeks ago. With as many churches we have in this nation, and I had an Irish theology professor when he immigrated to this country. He landed in Dallas, and when he looked around, there was a church on every block, and sometimes there were 4 churches on every block. And he said, wow, this has got to be the most Christian country on the face of history. And then he got to know everybody. You see, long ago, the church quit acting as a missionary outpost, trying to help people. We quit worrying about feeding the hungry and the thirsty and visiting the prisoner, and we became more about politics and theologies. Today, the United Methodist Church, you're seeing this now almost on a daily basis as these pastors, I don't even know where we got these guys. They are not United Methodists, but they're speaking for us about how you cannot stay United Methodist because they don't believe in Jesus, they don't believe in God, they don't believe in the Bible. And it's like, why are you in my church if you hate me that much? Somehow we've forgotten that at the end of the day, Jesus didn't tell us to go defend God, defend our theology, our ritual, our polity. Jesus told us to go out there and take care of the least, the last, and the lost. To do works of mercy, act for justice, and just simply love one another. And after Friday, that's going to be a lot harder to do. No matter which side of the spectrum you're on, that is only going to drive the division deeper and wider. And more political scientists are warning this country is headed to a dark, dark place. And the church and its pastors are leading that charge. Because we no longer think about the people behind our politics or our theologies. It's now all about being right. I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm willing to demonize you. I'm willing to gin up hate against you to get my way. Yesterday, if you caught the news, someone took a truck and plowed through a group of demonstrators, protesters, because they didn't agree with their political stance. A few weeks ago at a Pride event, a group of white Christian nationals, about 40 of them, were arrested because they were going to start a riot and try to beat as many homosexuals as they could. Happening in our country in the name of Jesus Christ. Now, I grew up being told taking God's name in vain was that GD word. And then I went to seminary and learned it had nothing to do with that. Taking God's name in vain means using God to justify your hatred for another person. And as Christian nationalism continues to rise in this country, we're going to a very dark place. Now, what do we do about that? I think it's time we stand up to these bullies. We do that with every act of kindness and love that we can muster. Every time we feed someone, every time we love someone, we're saying to this dark world, I don't give a damn about your hatred, because love is the only thing that matters to me. Because love is the only thing that has ever changed this world, and I will side with love every single time. Far too often we tolerate evil. Far too often we tolerate the most offensive, bullying people. We need to stand up to them. and say, no, I'm not going to listen to you if you're going to tell me to hate my neighbor. I'm not going to listen to you if you're demonizing my friends. I'm not going to listen to you if all you preach and all you teach is anger, hate, and fear, because that is not Jesus Christ. Think about Jesus' life just in a little brief minute. He sat down with a woman caught in adultery. Bible clearly says she's a sinner, should be stoned, and Jesus says, I don't care. She's a person worthy of love. And all you picking up your stones, you need to go home because you know nothing about God's love. Jesus stood up to that bully. When Jesus sat with the woman at the well, what we don't, I think about, is that woman is at that well by herself because the rest of the town has excluded her. They've judged, they've condemned her, she's not welcome in the community. So instead of going with the other women to draw water, she has to go by herself because that's how her community treated her. Not as a person, but as a sinner. And Jesus sat down with her and said, I don't care if you've had 5 husbands. I don't care if the guy you're living with now is not even your husband. What I care about is that you are a child of God worthy of love. And she was so excited, she ran back to that village that hated her, and she stood up to those bullies by proclaiming God's love to them. That you guys don't have to be this way. You don't have to be hateful and angry. You can simply love. That's who Jesus was. That's how Jesus treated the world. Now, it's easy to give in to despair when things aren't going our way. When we listen to the 24-hour news cycle and every single day they're drilling into our head, we have so much to fear and so much to be angry about. You know, I know exactly who's addicted to the news and who's not by your demeanor. Because that stuff is poison. And it's not the gospel. And we're filling ourselves with that nonsense every single day. And it's changing our hearts. It's hardening our hearts. That's not who Christ was. Christ always saw hope in every situation because he knew at the end of the day, God has got this. As Martin Luther King once said, the arc of justice always bends towards mercy and love, no matter how long it takes. God's justice will always bend towards love. And we have to believe in that hope. We can't be like the rest of this nation and just give in to our fear and anger and turn against one another. We are the ones called to heal these divisions. We're the ones called to teach the world, hey, lay aside your politics, lay aside your religious beliefs, your opinions, and look at a person as a child of God. Whether they be black or white, Hispanic, Hindu, Jew, whether they be gay or straight, transgender, whether they are pro-life or pro-choice, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, however we divide ourselves up, we've got to start healing those divisions. Or what will happen to us and our nation and our church is going to be a very dark matter. I believe we can do that when we start seeing each other as children of God. Just as Jesus saw all those tax collectors and sinners as children of God. Now, I'm not pretending to have an answer for every political opinion in this nation, at least not from this pulpit. I'll be glad to tell you that in private, what you need to change. But what I do know is that if we don't put our politics aside, if we don't put our sacred theologies aside and simply start loving one another, we're never going to solve anything. We'll just be a bitterly divided people waging a war. We did that once back in 1860. It didn't work out so well. I hope it doesn't happen again. Because I hope that the church steps up and finally becomes the church God's always wanted it to be. A place of love, a place of acceptance, a place where we always throw our arms open and we welcome the least, the last, the lost, the sinner and the saint, where we see people not as these labels we have in this country, but we see them as somebody created in God's image and worthy of God's love. And until our theologies start proclaiming that simple message, our theologies are wrong. Our politics are wrong. Because the only thing that matters in God's eyes are people. And as a nation, as a church, we've got to stop judging them and condemning them. Or we are nothing more than the schoolyard bully. May we pray. God, we pray for your healing to come upon our faith, upon our churches, and to make us once again those places of hope and love. Let us never be a symbol of hate or anger or division. Let us never judge or condemn, but let us stand up for the love of others. Let us struggle for justice and for mercy. And let us look beyond our politics and our theologies that have created such deep divisions between us, and help us to come together, to work together, to be your kingdom, to feed the hungry, to give water to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to give shelter to the homeless, to visit the imprisoned and the sick, to simply be a people that loves and cares for all. God, in the Christian life, there are no enemies. There are no nations or ideologies to fight. There are just people to be loved. God, teach us to love past our differences, to love past our cherished opinions and beliefs, to embrace each other, again, as brothers and sisters. When we can do